Well, live there, live here. Right, we're good. Button. Hello, this is Derps Talk About Games. I'm your co-host, Mango.
And I am your co-host, Buddy.
And today we're going to talk a little bit about Abberus, the Shadowed Crucible. But before we do that, Buddy, why don't you show the folks at home what it is we do on this podcast?
On this podcast, we talk about video games. This is a real return to form. I feel like a real classic. We've done the raid. We got AOTC in honestly a somewhat somewhat surprising and heroic manner. So today's the day that we actually go through and talk a little bit about what what the last raid was like, what we liked about it, what we didn't like, all that good stuff. So yeah.
I mean,
Where do you want to go?
I do want to say off the top, like I do think we could have gotten there, but I think we got through that pretty clearly because like you showed up, and then particularly Marok and who was
Karma.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, how did this go so well? There's two people who aren't normally here on the top of the the damage charts, right? Like doing it. So
yeah, I mean, I feel like it was just so folks at home know, we have been doing Sarkareth, the final boss, on heroic for maybe like a week or two. I don't actually really remember because I have not been super consistent with raid recently. And on the third week, we killed Sarkareth on the first pull. And that pull included some helps from some friends of the raid who don't normally show up. Yeah, and it was done, one and done, right? Like, we just kind of had it, which is, I don't know, fun, interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
but let's go over these bosses from start to finish. All right, I should have brought this up ahead of time.
So the first boss is the dragon, like Hazareth or whatever, right?
Yeah. No, it's the dragon. It's the Shadow Flame dragon. And I will get the full name in a second. And bosses, and the name is Khazra the Hellforged.
Khazra the Hellforged. All right.
So, how did you feel about Khazra the Hellforged?
It's funny because we always talk about these first bosses, and I'm just like, they are they're there to be loot pinatas. A first boss is designed to die essentially as soon as the raid starts, which I actually kind of think is okay. Like I think that's fine. But it is interesting to sort of think about what makes for good design on bosses like this. And in that matter, Khazra is pretty fine. Khazra is a dragon. And has pretty typical dragon mechanics in the sense of, you want to keep to the sides. There's a big flame breath, all this other sort of stuff. But her core thing is that she is an undead dragon who is the dragon that Deathwing practiced his Elementium armor trick on by killing and resurrecting her over and over again, basically. And that process drove her insane. And as the fight goes on, more of the armor gets shed off in these sort of pieces and reveals more of the, the rotten undead dragon underneath. And I don't know, it's a pretty good fight. It's a pretty fun fight. I feel like I have nothing important or interesting to sort of say about the mechanics other than that they were very they're trap mechanics, which I think are interesting. They entrap you and your mind to overthink them in a way that I think is like kind of funny and frustrating. Having to do this thing where she will mark certain players to spawn a portal and then other players to draw a line, and you have to draw the line into the portal in order to close it, and that process is not always sort of like easy or simple. I
will say, you said it's like a meant to be a loot pinata. It is the first one in a while that has like that had a little bit of like a bite to it, right? Like basically the issue there's an issue of like putting the pulls in the right places, and then the other issue is not accidentally doubling up on a pool and sending someone to like, you know, run across the thing to, you know, because it's not quite dragging a line. It's you get marked and like a moving thing follows you and it needs to hit a pool to go away. And so like this has happened to me a number of times where like, you know, two people stand behind the same pool, only one person gets it cleared and the other person has to go like run around to try and like drop their beam off at some point, and it's kind of aggravating. But yeah, not much else to say, but other than it's like kind of like the hardest one of these opening bosses in a while, but that's not saying much, right? Like, you know.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's super fun. Like the Terra
Terra Grew was fun.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, Terra Grew, right? I'm not Tarask. The Terra Grew was fun because you got those like extra powers. So it was like this, like, you know, I don't know, almost like roguelike kind of mode. But yeah, that's interesting. I guess just default. I sort of want to rank the bosses, but because we only have the one, we'll just say, you know, Kazra is in there. It's the start, and then we'll start going above and below. The next boss, because we always went left. The next boss was to go to the amalgamation chamber, where there is the fire boss and the shadow boss, and then they combine and become the shadow flame boss. This boss I actually quite liked, but I quite liked it because we cheesed it basically. In my first raid, in my raid with like one group of my friends, basically. The idea for the amalgamation chamber was we basically just forced them on top of each other. Like we forced them on top of each other pretty quickly, and then we just lusted and just like beat them to death, right? We let both halves kind of combine, and then we just absolutely tore them to shreds. Whereas the better way to do this fight is to bring both health pools down evenly, so when they combine at a normal at sort of like a normal value. But I thought that difference in tactics was interesting. You can basically skip the first phase by lusting and taking 1 to 50 immediately. Or, you know, you can play both phases carefully in order to do the boss kind of as designed.
Yeah, no, that's fair. That's interesting. So what worked in that? You just like kept one boss off to the side, murdered the first one.
You keep one boss off to the side, and then you just have the other boss, because when one of the two hits 50%, it transforms, right? And then the transforms, it starts that ramping thing, but it basically just skips the whole first phase. You don't have to do anything, and then you're just in the phase of ramping AoE damage and going front to back, right? And just reducing the mechanics bloat to just make it very simple. You don't have to split the raid, you don't have to do any of that stuff, because you can just burn extra DPS is kind of interesting and fun to me.
No, that makes sense. I've never played it that way. Obviously because I only raid with our raid. They did it the traditional way. But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was fine, right? Like I don't know, it felt like a boss I'd seen before kind of deal, right? Like it wasn't particularly interesting to me. I didn't think it was bad, just like passable, right? Like yeah, I don't know if I've got a lot to say about it, right? Because it's just kind of like, you know, a bunch of dodging mechanics and like, you know, one kind of like bring pools out mechanic, and that's basically it, right? Like, am I missing anything there? I want to soak.
Nope.
Like,
It starts by saying mortal piss. That's the most
Yeah.
interesting thing about this boss,
Yes.
to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Is there any loot off these first two bosses that you thought was cool or interesting?
Oh,
Was any of this chase loot for you?
I have forgotten about loot for a long time. I just like haven't thought about it. So something I realized recently is I am the lowest geared person in our raid group, despite like normally taking like a third on the DPS charts.
Yeah, wow.
I'm at like 327, I think, or 329, something in there.
That is incredible to me.
Yeah, it's because basically since I've been playing Baldur's Gate, all I do is raid, and like I just haven't gotten drops.
Sure.
In a little while. Yeah, like it's basically I got my set pretty early, and past that just kind of been like whatever, right? Like it's you know, it's just numbers at that point. So
Did you like your set? Is your set good this round?
I thought it was fun, or it didn't change the way I played the character. It doesn't have like a particularly flashy visual effect, so it's I kind of don't notice. Like I notice my number go up, right? But like you know, it basically what it does is I think it's Fists of Fury and Rising Sun Kick play off each other. Like one of them buffs the other. I forget which way it goes, and then there's a talent that makes it go the other way. But like you know, my number went up. It felt good, right? Like
Yeah, one thing that I think is interesting about set design, this is my philosophy on set design, is you should use tier sets to change up the default gameplay, you know, patch to patch, so that people are taking slightly different builds, a little bit different rotations, right? You know, maybe they'll get force set and they'll prioritize this one thing in this one way or that thing in that way, kind of thing. This did not happen for me. My build was basically the exact same in Raid. It did change in Mythic Plus, though. In Mythic Plus, it became very much about sweeping strikes, and I was doing a lot of like 2-target cleave stuff. But in Raid, I was basically just doing normal, same ass shit. You know, like no differences.
yeah, same. I mean, like Fist of Fury and Rising Sun Kick are high priority abilities anyway, so it's not like I'm already casting them on cooldown. It's not like delaying one for the other mattered because it's the amount of times like you know like one extra, even two if we're being generous, one extra like you know of that buff on a particular thing would like make the difference to me. Just wasn't there.
Yep. Nope. I feel you completely.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I know I'm still using a Hell Torch because I haven't gotten a good trinket drop.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense because I do think trinkets matter, right?
yeah,
But I think the most important pieces of gear are going to be like set bonuses and trinkets because those are the things that like are more than just stat sticks, right? There are a couple of pieces of chase gear that it's like, oh my god, I got, you know, X. But a lot of the time those have cantrips on them. You know, just like extra effects. So the sword that Neltharion drops is a good example of that. But yeah.
yeah. And I I don't think I've seen one that particularly benefits Monk in a long time. Just because I don't know. I feel like
It
Monk
would have
is
been 9.1, right? It would have been those fists, the bleed fists, right?
9.1 is which
The what's Sanctum of Domination?
oh, okay, yeah, yeah. Um Honestly, the most exciting piece of gear out of Sanctum, I think, was the spear that turned you into a Valkyrie. That was the one that like felt the most different.
Oh,
Um,
sure.
but like the bleed fists, yeah, they did like they weren't that crazy, right? Like nothing. I don't know. Maybe I was just discounting it because like I don't know. I feel like if I can't see it, it's just kind of like well the number went up, right? And like if the number doesn't go up particularly, then like you know in a way that like you know everything feels incremental, right? Like I don't feel like I get a big pop out of anything. Um, but you know that's the way it goes sometimes, right? Like you know I feel like they're like that's why I like borrowed power, like the different pieces was like you know oh this I had a whole other mechanic like you know like Phaline Stomp was a thing that came into my rotation for the entire uh expansion. Um,
Yep.
and I still use it because I like it, but like um just haven't uh had anything like change it up in a while. Um, just because you know I was able to keep doing Phaline Stomp. Basically, the biggest thing for me is like with the new talent changes is I'm actively switching between my single target and my multi-target build. Whereas like previously, I would just kind of be like, it is what it is. I will like you know like I had started getting to the point where I was carrying talent books because I wanted to like perform better, but like with the talent changes, just kind of like okay, I will switch every time now. Just made it a little bit easier. Um, yeah,
Okay. Yeah,
yeah.
sure. When it comes to ranking amalgamation chamber, is it higher or lower than Kazara?
Lower, but like not by much, right? Like they're both kind of like and Kazara at least felt a little bit more interesting to me.
Okay. Yeah, my default is to say that Amalgamation Chamber is higher. Maybe it's a flavor thing because I like the Shadow Flame. You know, this whole thing is about this, you know, kind of corrupting power of Shadow Flame. You actually get to see it in action or whatever. I don't know. Then after that, I think is the first kind of real interesting boss fight, which was the Forgotten Experiments, right? 3-phase sort of council fight. You go from one to the next to the next. But the thing that made this fight so interesting were the breakpoints and the management of that debuff in, you know, in the second phase, you're fighting a guy, he puts on a debuff that every time you cleanse it, it jumps to another player. So you have to deal with it for the rest of the raid. And you can deal with 2 of them or 3 of them, depending on how efficiently you blow that guy up. And I think, and that was really like fun and engaging, right? Partially because it gave me a reason to get really like incredibly deep in my own rotation. The feeling of perfecting my opening on that fight so that I could get just the right burst phase on that guy is really satisfying. Did you have that? Did you have that same sort of thing, or did you not worry
No,
about
I
it?
had the anti version of that because like I couldn't afford to not cast Zuin because like I would just like miss a cycle of it if I didn't cast it immediately, right? And that like the DPS loss there was too big, right, for it to be worth it. Um, but like the better we did as a raid, the further off perfect I was, right? Like
Oh, I see.
when we first started doing it, we weren't super tuned, and so I would like you know, it'd be like 2 seconds into the second boss that I would like get that back up and I'd get my full burst and it'd feel great. But like by the end, it was like, you know, it was like you know, there was like a 3 second overlap with Lust, where I had Zoo, and it's like it just felt bad, right? Because like, you know, obviously it's the correct decision for the raid, but like my personal performance suffered as a result, and it feels
Yeah,
bad in the
that it
end.
was that actually is super true because one of the things that's complicated for me is I have um you can use 1 minute cooldowns and I have 90-second cooldowns. But I have 90-second cooldowns that can get reduced, right? So I can bring them down closer to sort of a minute. And there's that thing of, do I hold, like, we are 30 seconds away. Do I add my damage to this or do I hold my cooldowns, right? And a lot of the time for me, I was in this frustrating position where I was like, boy, I bet if I do my cycle here, we push it over. And in the correct example, and the correct decision is for me to hold, just because if I don't hold, I'm going to push the damage such that it was incorrect. But if I do hold, then it is correct in a way,
Yeah,
because
yeah,
like
I know
there's
exactly what you mean.
actually enough time and I'm sitting on the buttons for forever. And that feeling is kind of like bad. But I love the proactiveness of using cooldowns in that kind of way. And that to me just sells this whole boss fight when it comes to sort of like design. It's the boss fight where I'm interacting with my I don't know, where I'm interacting with my build, with my rotation in probably the most minute ways, right? It is about maximizing my performance under these certain scenarios, which is probably what, you know, one of the big goals when it comes to a boss fight along these lines. So I guess it's kind of high praise, sort of.
Yeah, no, I mean, I would be more on board with that if it was like if like because it feels like anything that's like in that category that Monk is in, where it's like you can't afford to lose. Like it is so close to that timer that it like you like I couldn't hold it. Like holding it for the whole time would be nonsense, right? Like, you know,
Sure.
um, uh, but like I get what you're saying. The other thing, the other big mechanic is the orbs, right? Like both the dispel orbs and kind of like the shield orbs. And I don't know how I feel about the shield orbs, because like I feel like the amount of like battlefield control that the boss has makes that mechanic more frustrating, because you kind of have to be like out of a thing while he's doing it, but then like this orb is still homing in on him, and it's hard to manage that while like the you know the field, like there's a third of the field that's like actively uh out of them. Like it still loses the shot. Shield orbs are cheating. He can fly right into where you're bouncing them, right? Like that is the thing that I find frustrating about them. I don't think they're a bad mechanic in isolation, but I think they were not well used on this fight. Like the dispel orbs, I think were like fine. They could be a little bit hairy. The only thing that bothered me, the only thing that ever caught me up about them is that like I have a self dispel, right? Diffuse magic, right?
Yeah.
And when I was taking damage, I would sometimes instinctually pop it for like a damage reduction, but that would also pop the orb off of me. I was just kind of like, oh, I fucked everything up because I like dropped it in the middle of the raid.
Oh yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think we also approached those orbs wrong, like intentionally wrong. So basically, those orbs, we held those orbs way longer than we should have, right? You're supposed to get them up to like 10 or 12 or 15 stacks and then swap over, but we were holding till like 25 or 30, which on one hand, I actually quite liked that. I thought that was fun. It's a great way for me to exercise mastery of the game, right? By cycling my defensives, by keeping myself up, by using potions and stuff like that, my health stones proactively. I think all of that stuff is like really interesting and fun. But it's like one of those things where if the mechanic targets not me, like or like not a player of my caliber, like it can fuck us, right? Because it targets the wrong person. That person doesn't know how to do any of this stuff. They die. It swaps over or whatever. It's just like, ugh. But I appreciated the expression of mastery, right? Lou in the chat says, I've never gotten rid of my own debuff before 25. It's like, yeah, like I know I could keep it up. You can trust me with it. That's a good feeling.
That makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. So like, yeah, like I said, that mechanic I wasn't too chuffed about, but or too aggravated about. I forget if chuffed is good or bad. I'm not a British. But the shield orbs I think were like could be like very, very frustrating. Louis says chuffed is good, so I'm not, so I guess I was chuffed about those orbs. I don't know. I don't care. But yeah. I think just to kind of like get back to our kind of stack ranking here, I might actually put this one at the bottom just because that shield. I found that shield orb so frustrating, right? Like, and I don't know. Also, I feel like the time between raid start and AOTC is a little bit longer than we typically are. So like a lot of these are starting to feel like normalized in my mind in a way that like I think it's detracting from my ability to evaluate.
Remember what it was like to prog those bosses?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely liked Forgotten Experience, and so I would put it on top. So you and I have exact opposite rankings at this moment, right? Mine would be Forgotten Experiments, Amalgam, Kazara. You would be Kazara, Amalgam, Forgotten Experiments.
Yes.
Okay, interesting. Okay, the next one would be when we swap over to the other wing, right? We do Assault of the Zakali, led by Warlord Cagney, and you split the raid, 2 different platforms, a bunch of ads spawn. You beat their asses. I feel like you're gonna tell me that you love this because it was a huge multi-target fight,
yes,
and you
exactly.
got to just like. Okay,
yes.
Interesting.
Yes, I got to use. I didn't even use my full multi-target build because the second half of the fight is single target. But like it's like the only true multi-target fight in the raid, and so I loved it because it got to use flying guillotine. It is what it comes down to, right? Like, and so I had a ton of fun with it. I never threw a rock because I was like, why would I throw a rock when I can punch? But like. I thought that was, it was also one of those like weird perverse things where like, if the raid was doing particularly well, I would get less groupings of ads. And so I would personally do worse. But like that is always a problem with multi-target fights. It's like, as you get better at it, the waves don't wave as much. And so I don't get as much like crispy kind of like group booms. But,
nope, I feel you entirely. It's one of those things where the correct way, I swapped to a Bladestorm build for that fight. Some of the time, not all the time. The correct way to do that fight is to like clear the ads as much as possible, but like the more fun way to do that fight is to let the ads clump really hard and then blow tons of burst AoE on them. And I definitely did hold Bladestorm and like my whole combo sometimes, my whole big AoE combo sometimes, just to fuck around, sort of. And it's just like, oh, like I could Bladestorm here, it's correct. there's 3 targets, one of them is really high priority, we should get it down. But then no, I would just like wait and I would let them group up and then just like, okay, bladestorming 9 things feels so much better, even though really I should have bladestormed 3 and then bladestormed and then, you know, killed the following 6 kind of thing. The other thing that I did on this fight that was also very scuffed is I would swap sides. There were some times where I would go into the fight raw single target and I would just follow the boss, but I just wouldn't tell anybody. I would sit on the boss and I would single target the boss to push him into his face as fast as possible, and he would swap sides, and I would heroic leap, and I would run to the other side, and I would just go like single target the boss, you know, more, which probably caused wipes, if I'm being completely honest with myself. Like, if there were times where we got overwhelmed with ads, it's likely that I was secretly targeting the boss in this way, because I was just sort of tunneling on the, you know, like the thing instead of like dealing with the guys who actually mattered. Like,
Yeah, no, hey, you know, that sounds you know, sounds like you.
I also really liked the lore of this boss, right? You know, there is the Zakali Elder, who has been used as the furnace to, you know, provide the power for this crucible all this time. They're trying to break in to get there, and so we're fighting them. There's just something about like, it's a very cinematic boss fight compared to one where it's just like, there's a guy, he's in a room, you beat his ass. It's like, oh, this actually kind of makes sense, right?
and has
In like a
it has like ties to like the story quest, right? Like if you do the quest line with the blind seer on the side of the volcano, he'll tell you about like, you know, like, and rumors have it that the Zakali is still beneath the mountain, you know, the elder is still beneath the mountain. And that feels good, where it's like, you know, nothing against amalgamation, but like or amalgamation, right? Rather, amalgamation is just kind of like, this boss is here, we will provide justification in the moment, and you know, and that is basically it, and you'll never care about the story beat there again, right?
yeah,
Like,
there are certain things about this raid on a story level that I like and dislike. One of them, this is me sort of like ruining myself to all fantasy literature, but one of them is like the perfectly preserved thing after like 10,000 years. Honestly, it's longer than 10,000. It's like 12,000 years this has been below ground or whatever. And it's just like, really? This whole place is still just that, like 12,000 years? Do people can consider how long that is? The Ice Age was before Neanderthals roamed the world 12,000 years ago. Actually, I don't know that that's true. I know the Ice Age was 10,000 years ago, but I don't know about Neanderthals, right? It's just like, that's a long ass time, you guys. Like, but I think that there's something to be said, like, it's a fantasy trope that there's this vault underground and it's been untouched for millennia, that kind of thing.
yeah, I will say that at least here, like, there are like automatons taking care of it, right? It's not
Mm.
totally nuts. But yeah, no, I feel that, you know, I don't mind the fan.
Honestly, this is related to one gripe that I will discuss later in the podcast.
Okay. Yeah, Lou, I just want to call it Lou and Trent's. I like this fight in large groups where I get to actually throw rocks for people at home that don't know. The mechanic is they're like interactables on the ground that you can throw over the edge, knock off people that are climbing up the cliffs. And they yell, "I fall," which is probably the second best voice call in the raid.
Yeah, the first best is Mortal Piss. Okay.
Second best is like, we fall. Is it we fall or I fall?
It's we fall. Yeah.
And you know, and it's a way to deal with that. So, you know, that's a neat thing to do, right? Like, neat thing, neat unique mechanic. So this one's going to the top for me on our power rankings chart. Perhaps unsurprisingly.
Okay, I think this one is second for me. It's below. I like Forgotten Experiments better, but I
Yep.
probably like it second as much.
Yeah, I will also cop to the fact that, like, this is probably largely because I like multi-target fights. Like, my class is good at multi-target fights, and so I'm gonna bias heavily in favor of it. But you know, but yeah, that's the way it goes sometimes. All right, next up is Rashak, the actual elder in question, that like jumps around and throws stuff at people. And
yeah, this is like, in my opinion, the first hard fight of the raid, like the realist fight. But I also love these fights. These are sort of shmup fights, right? Where it's just like bullet hells. and I love bullet hells, but I think other people hate them.
Yeah, I would say like I don't know if I think Forgotten Experiments or a Shock is harder. And some of it with Forgotten Experiments is the kind of like weirdness with like the randomness with the shield, and also kind of like you were saying, like, you know, the the balls on a person who can't handle it, the spell balls on a person that can't handle it, I think is can be more frustrating because it won't immediately kill you, but like you'll start to snowball there. Whereas like someone can single handedly tank the entire fight if they place the guy throws pools on you, but if the pools stack, basically you're done, right? Like the fucking fight's over, right? Like it'll burst enough, and like you'll but like at least that's quick, at least that's immediate, right? And it's also a thing that because it's so immediate, and like you teach people like you do that once, maybe twice, before you realize you're being a dickhead if you don't figure out how to fucking deal with it, right? Like, so normally I kind of have issues with kind of like, you know, or rather I not have issues, but I loathe the kind of mechanics that are like, if it happens to go on the weakest person in your raid, you're fucked because they don't know how to deal with it, right? Like we're the newest person, right? Like not, I don't want to like, you know, come down on, you know, more casual players too hard, but like, it is hard to carry someone through a raid when they have like a responsibility that has to deal with them. But this one seems to be, it's like easy enough and clear enough, and like that, like it tends not to be a recurring problem. Yes, it might be frustrating when, you know, the first time dude heroic leaps into another pool and like or like misses, you know, it's like overlaps by like half an inch and like fucks the raid, right? But um normally, you know, it's a thing that resolves itself. The thing that the other one that's interesting to me, and we never had a problem with this, but I think it's an interesting design, is that there's a soak, and if not everybody's in a soak, then like the timing of the fight gets all thrown out of whack, which feels like it'd be like weird to recover from. But like I said, we never really had that particular problem.
Yeah, part of it is that we're a very melee raid, right? So
Yeah.
we tend to be super uh super tight together. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I like Rashak specifically just for the bullet hell, the tiny little blue, you know, waves of stuff coming out. That's like a mechanic that has been in other boss fights that I've just like I love people hate. I'm thinking like Twin Ogron in Warlords of Draenor like 10 years ago was a fight like that. People loathed that fight, but I love that fight. And I think that what it comes down to is I get really good at sort of this. I find there's this like zen zone where I'm not even thinking about it, right? It's not like I'm looking at the path and deciding where to go, but it's just like I'm one with the wind, okay? And I'm just bobbing and weaving and I'm just never getting hit by any of these things. And that's like a really good personal sort of like, I don't know, it's just like a good personal feeling. And it probably only ever shows up once an expansion in a raid fight like this, and I savor it like a juicy steak, okay, when it does pop up, because it's just I don't know, it's very fun.
Yeah, no, I feel that. Yeah, I would agree. It is very, very fun. I personally felt that more about like the kind of like the reset phase where like he stands in the middle and like throws out like tons of lines in different directions. I is similar kind of bullet hell thing, but like in a different manner. And that was the one that I kind of enjoyed. It's kind of like, whoop, we gotta like dodge between, you know, weave between the lines there. So
I
yeah.
also appreciate that this is a raid fight that you can perfect. It's a raid fight where you can take sort of zero environmental damage, which feels good. There's the soak, which is guaranteed damage, and there's sort of the pulse, which is guaranteed damage. But you know, there's just a lot of stuff that you can just, if you are a good player and you avoid all the mechanics, you will take zero damage. And that's like a good mastery kind of
Yeah.
feeling. It's also a raid fight that I think it reminds me a lot of was this Stone Fist? The chains guy? And
With
you aim him at the
pillars,
pillars?
yeah, I think that's Stone Fist. Yeah.
Sludge Fist maybe is what
Yeah,
it's called?
Sludge Fist sounds more
Okay.
right.
It reminds me of that in the sense that he was also sort of like a pretty tight fight when it came to damage, but I feel like our we weren't pressed by the damage wall as much as I expected, to be honest.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, I don't think we ever like were in danger of like running out of space. Right? Like at best we do like 3 of the 4 corners of the room, and I don't think we ever like were pushing into the 4th one.
Yep.
Um but yeah, I would say I'd put Rashok probably in like second place in my current set of rankings. So Zakali, Rashok, Kisara, Amalgamation, Forgotten Experiments for me.
Okay. Yeah, I think I want to say Rashok is number 1. So that's Rashok, Forgotten, what else did we say? Zakali, Amalgamation, Kazara, right?
Yeah. That's the
Okay.
order.
The other thing about Rashok that didn't affect either of us but was interesting is an absolutely broken nutty healing trinket in there, which I don't understand because I'm not a healer and I never do healing stuff and I never even care. But it was interesting and I noted it for future interesting stuff, I guess. Just as like one of the pieces of like quest gear, or not quest gear, of raid gear that like people cared a lot about. Like the stuff coming off Rashok was something that people cared a lot about. Okay. After Rashok, we go upstairs, and then there's Ziskarn, this trap guy. He's like, Dexter's lab, Poindexter kind of nerd who works for Neltharion, throws out a bunch of bombs, says a bunch of bullshit. I fucking hated this boss.
Me too.
They changed it a couple of times. I guess they ended up in an okay spot, but it was just the most frustrating boss fight to fight because it just was a constant bullshit all the time, it feels like.
That's the bullshit. It felt fairly illegible to me as well, right? Like, I eventually figured out exactly what was going on, but like, the ability to kind of like pick up the fight as you went felt like less good than any of the other fights. I also like, I don't know, I didn't find the mechanics particularly engaging. It's like dodge a bunch of flames, kill some robots, avoid traps, right? Like, I don't know. It felt like a bunch of bullshit. It's just what it
Yeah.
was.
It's kind of the anti-Painsmith in my opinion. In Painsmith, it's or like the mirror inverse of Painsmith. Painsmith had a couple of mechanics that were brutally tough, right? But you could deal with them, and it was all in service to sort of like the boss design. He's this torturer, he's putting people in Iron Maidens and all this other sort of stuff. That fight worked, and I loved it, and everybody really loved Painsmith, right? It was just incredibly super fun. But this guy I felt like had a similar sort of idea, but like instead of having all of those mechanics kind of come together into just one cohesive unit, like one cohesive package that was a lot of fun to go through, it was unfun and sucked, and it was all random, and that sucked so much and was so crazy. And then they made it unrandom, and it was, I guess, kind of better. I don't know.
Yeah,
That's it. That's it.
so I will say I think that's part of it, right? Like his Painsmith
Yeah.
had like near perfect predictability, right? Like the direction that the rolling balls came out of was random, but
Correct. Yeah.
but like that's also like a slow moving mechanic that you can figure out, right? Like here stuff felt random-ish. Like the thing that always felt the worst to me is that like those flame traps on the ground would pop up occasionally in spaces where I'd be like sectioned off from the boss. It's like, well, I guess I'm not doing damage for another like 3 or 4 seconds. I didn't feel like I could like, and maybe this is just me. I also feel like I didn't do this boss a ton. That like, it felt to me like I couldn't account for that. It's kind of like I might like on approximately a third to 2/3 of the runs we're doing tonight, I'm going to be off the ball. I'm going to lose DPS for significant portions of the fight because I got screwed by RNG, or at least my inability to kind of like properly absorb the mechanics. And so I did not have a great time with this fight. Also, kind of like it's one of those fights where it's like I felt like there are several fights in this raid that I won't call it a problem because like if feels nice to like be able to bring the utility. But like this fight is like there are ads. Should I be bringing my ad killing? Like my I have a partial AOE spec that I couldn't really use the AOE in this fight, but like bringing the faster cooldown on Touch of Death is something is occasionally useful for like knocking down a thing that needs to be knocked down fast. It's like, and it felt like it didn't feel particularly great to go the single target build, but it also didn't feel great to go the multi target build because I wasn't actually doing multi target. I was just bringing faster cooldowns on Touch of Death, and so it's like the unhappy medium for me particularly. So for me, at least, this fight goes to the very bottom of the list.
Okay. Yep. I think I agree. It's probably the very bottom of my list. Good try. I don't like it. We basically didn't do it ever again. We did it like I feel like we did it the first couple of times, then we just started using skips and fucking around, and it was just like, okay, yep, I'm done. Like I don't want to do this shit anymore.
I felt
the next fight is. Oh, I'm sorry. Go for it.
I would say like we ended up skipping the next fight, Magmarax, a bunch as well, but I felt a little sad about that because I actually enjoyed the Magmarax fight.
Really? Yeah. So Magmarax is the exact opposite fight, which was a fight that was sort of trivialized if you did it right, and it was and at that point just kind of made it just like a target dummy, and I guess that's fine, but I feel like that's like a lack of a good fight, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so I agree with you, but it was definitely cathartic after Zyskar.
Fair enough.
Which is maybe what's coming to me for this one, right? Like,
yeah, like on Heroic, does he even get a new mechanic? If he did, I didn't see it. I understood the direction. I understood that the fight was supposed to be that you're keeping him from he can absorb all this lava from like extra sources. You want to keep that from happening as much as humanly possible. Okay. But it just was so trivially easy to not inject him with further lava, and I basically never had to deal with any like I just stood still. I just stood still the whole time, right? The one piece of like clever decision making is I was once in a group where there were two people who got marked, and I went to the group that didn't get a mark naturally occurring in it, and my raid leader at the time said, "Good job," and I was like, "Yep, I did mechanic. That's like the only mechanic I ever fucking did that fight."
Yeah, no, I mean, there were, it is, things that felt satisfying to me is like, people are derping and aren't paying attention, and I was able to go over and keep, and help shrink the pool because nobody else did it, and I did it that one time, and I was like, oh boy, I'm a smarty pants. But like, yeah, otherwise just kind of like beat up the sponge, and that's sometimes it's a nice palate cleanser, and I will give it that. But cool. Like, sure. It is a very nothing boss, I would say. I can't hate it, so I'm gonna place it, I think, probably right below Kazara.
Yeah, I'm also placing it below Kazara, though that makes it second from the last for me. I think that's just because this boss is kind of like it's like an SAT score where somebody wrote their name. Zyskar is an SAT score where someone intentionally got every question wrong, right? And they like lost like points or whatever. Magmarax didn't do that, but it also didn't gain points anywhere, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
I can hate it. It's boring as fuck. You stand in one spot for most of the fight and only move when it knocks you back. Return to a spot and repeat. Yeah, exactly. I didn't even move when it knocks me back. When it knocks me back, I just charge, and the charge cancels the knockback, and I'm just instantly staying melee. It's like the negative mechanics on this boss fight, basically.
Yeah, I mean, so to that point, sometimes it's fun to just like wail, right? Like to like get that, just like do rotation practice, right? Like, But yeah.
Okay, not untrue. Then we have Echo of Neltharion. Probably I would say the most impactful. This is probably the boss we did the most, I feel like.
Yeah.
In the sense of just spending a lot of time on it, progging on it, all this stuff. It also just like has a ton of different mechanics, 3 different phases. You have to break these walls. The walls happen in a couple of different ways. All this other sort of stuff sort of happens. It's the most kind of like, it's the boss that matters most for like story stuff, because the story of the raid is, you know, you are exploring this laboratory with the two sort of children of Neltharion, Sibelian on one side, Rathion on the other. This echo of Neltharion is trying to court them to, you know, sort of embrace the dark side. They both sort of say no and disappoint the echo, but it turns out the echo of Neltharion is a faceless one, and he's just fucking with them anyway, or whatever. There's all this other sort of stuff. What do you think? What's your thoughts?
I enjoyed the fight. I thought it was a lot of opportunity for like fun shenanigans, right? Like I feel like the wall breaking was a neat idea, but also like one of those ones that quickly just kind of was like, oh well, the tanks are gonna handle it, so you know it's actually a non-mechanic, which is fine. But like I don't know, less fun maybe. But I thought it was neat, right? Like lots, I brought my semi multi-target build for this for knocking down the race. Just like straight up dodging and like remembering things, right? Like remembering how to not stand in certain places, dodging mechanics. Remember, stay on the right side of the wall, right? Like,
yeah, I feel like this was a fight where I didn't care about damage at all. I was pretty off. All I cared about was like doing. It's one of those things where if you just kill in the right order, if you respect the mechanics and you do all that stuff, you're kind of fine, right? And but it's a boss where it's very easy to lose people along the way.
oh yeah,
And so you'll get to that third phase and all of a sudden you're 3 people down and it's like woof, that's tough kind of thing. And I think that that's actually kind of good in a way, because it creates these heart pumping moments where you're really pushing against the mounting odds, which I think is a lot of what boss fights should feel like sometimes, right? Most boss fights should feel like when you get the win, you're pulling it out by the skin of your teeth, and it is hard to design for that, but having mechanics like this kind of make that happen. Unfortunately, I also feel like there are a lot of like auto weight mechanics that are like not super great and kind of unfun. Things like tanks missing a wall appropriately always sucked, which
especially when it seemed like sometimes it was like not 100% reliable. Like it's not like it wasn't the tank's fault, right? Like they do the thing they were supposed to, and the wall just wouldn't break.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I think is supposed to happen, and I want to, cheer on this design, even if I don't think it worked. The thing that I think is supposed to happen is the tanks are break the wall, but then you can pull an audible, right? Which is, oh, he's doing his thing that you're normally slamming, into another location. But if you want to, now you can put someone's back to the wall and you have another opportunity to break the wall. The unfortunate thing is that it's hard to pull that kind of play off. Most of the time, like if a tank fails to break the wall, you lose a certain number of seconds, and even that is just not enough time to react so that the next person can get the beam that they normally aim away from the wall, to then have to actively be like, oh, I'm taking care of this. It's just like, it was like impossible to pull that off. But it's the kind of thing that I see the potential for. And I understood with the designer on paper, it's probably like, yes, they need to break the wall in order to move. If the tank misses it, then there's also this other mechanic that will break walls, and someone can then move in and substitute for the tank. And it's like, okay, I appreciate that design on paper, even if it never worked out, right?
Yeah, no, it's one of those things where it's like someone has to make it like, because the time window is so short, is like you basically have to autonomously make a decision, but no one kind of wants to do that because like they're not like, it's like, well, if we both go, then it's also not great, right? Like, because it's usually 2 people that have the secondary effect, I think. But like, it's like, it's like I was there. It's like failed to break the wall. I would say, should I go break the wall? And by the time I got a response, the effect was already like, had gone off, right? Like,
yeah, and then it's catastrophic if you and the other person both make that decision on the fly. It's like that, that kind of thing.
So the thing I want to compare this to is the seed pods for Artificer in Castle Nathria, which was like, that was like the true kind of like, hero. You as an individual can make the call and just like make it happen, because like it's like self-isolating, right? If 2 people go for it, one of them will get it, the other one will not. Um,
Yep.
and you know, even if you don't execute it totally, you can execute it in such a way that you will die, but you will save the rest of the raid, right? And I think that's like kind of like the right way to have those mechanics go, right? Like if it like even though like you drop DPS, right, and your parse is ruined, right? Like you made the clear happen, right? And so you feel good about it. So I think
Yep.
that's like kind of the better way to handle it. Um,
I also think I also love that, and I think that that's super true. I also think another mechanic in here that I want to call out, which is neat, was the ad spawning mechanic. I don't know if I've ever seen this mechanic before, but it's like maybe the one mechanic I would want to take forward from here and go, we should do this again. The thing where ads spawn based on the number of portals, each person has to step in a portal, and for each person, but like it is a just like a pass fail gate, right? If there are 10 people in one portal, it clips off. If there's one person in one portal, it clips off. And so having this thing where you have a bunch of people stand in the individual portals, and if your raid spreads out very well, you reduce the number of ads. I think that is also like a mastery mechanic that is in this fight, and this one in my opinion is much better and works better because it also kind of keys into the way that like the overwhelming nature of the ads is the soft enrage here, right? That fundamentally speaking, you can kind of do this fight forever. It's just a matter of can you keep cracking the portals, and making sure that no more ads are spawning. For that, and also it's maybe the most sort of interesting just in terms of a lot of stuff is going on. I don't know. We'll talk about, I guess, Sarkareth after this. And so I guess for that it's pretty high on my list. I think I want to put this in third spot under Rashak, under Forgotten Entities or whatever. But above Zakali is probably where I want to end up with Nelthari.
Yeah, I think I'll also put it in third, which is under Zakali, under Rashak, above Kazara, if I'm remembering correctly. Yeah.
Okay. There's one other piece that I wanted to call out here, which is the incredibly cool sword. The sword I obviously have an intense amount of love for because so the sword is a big two-handed strength sword or whatever. And the sword is called Ashkandar, which is a throwback to Ashkandi, which is a sword that dropped off of Neltharion in the original Blackwing lair from Vanilla WoW. Ashkandi was just like the best sword, but the cool thing about Ashkandi is it's called Ashkandi, Blade of the Brotherhood, and it has a reference to Anduin Lothar, which is a character from Warcraft 2. Anduin Lothar dies on the in the foothills of kind of on the steps of Black Rock Mountain, essentially. And the idea is that this is his sword that was taken and kind of abducted by Neltharion. When Blackwing Lair became Blackwing Descent, I think in Cataclysm, it's kind of like a re-up of that zone with or re-up of that raid with Neltharion. Ashkandi came back, and there was a second version, and this is sort of the third version of that sword. This is Ashkandar, Fall of the Brotherhood. The thing about Ashkandar that I love is it is a simple piece of gear with a very flavorful ability, right? Sometimes it does extra damage. That extra damage is doubled against humanoids, right? Okay, yeah, this is a sword that kills people basically, right? But I love throwback stuff like this. I think that's neat and that should feel good. Are the ghosts attacking you? I feel like I'm watching you look around.
Oh no, I have had flies in my basement, and I think I've mostly gotten them. So I was just checking to make sure I have my fly swatter ready.
Okay, very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, and that brings us obviously to Sarkareth, who is the final boss of the raid. Sarkareth being, the leader of the evil evokers, the centered flame. It's a three-phase boss fight. One where you fight him just sort of in his normal, then he gets void empowered, then he gets giga void empowered, right? There's a bunch of different mechanics here. I don't know. What did you think?
I thought it was a neat fight. I appreciated that it wasn't as long as some other fights, but it also didn't feel like Razageth felt like epic, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sarkareth does not feel nearly so epic. And I think some of that's just like, this is sound weird, but like camera work, right? Um, like very occasionally, like the camera would line up right, and I like when he like breaks like the window and the wind comes in, right? Like that's a cool looking moment, but like 95% of the time, I like I just like I was busy focused on something else, so I didn't see it happen in a neat way. Um, Whereas like in say Razgeth, there's like a bunch of dynamism, right? Like you're moving around a bunch, you're moving places. Razgeth is physically large. There's a bunch of stuff happening. Felt epic. Um, uh, what's Sylvanas? I hated that fight because it was like 30 minutes long, right? But like there was a lot happening, and like the phases were so distinct, and you felt like a big journey, right? Like, um, uh, but this fight just like doesn't feel quite so good, right? Like in terms of like impact.
It's also a very in the like the nature of the story. It's a very quiet boss
Yeah,
fight. In introspective. Most other big boss fights tend to be climactic, but also of intense plot relevance, right? So for instance, Sylvanas' boss fight, this is the jailer triumphant, right? This is him breaking free of the maw, stealing, back this power and becoming in his most powerful self, right? On top of like the stuff where he betrays his most loyal lieutenant in Sylvanas and all this other stuff, right? Um Razageth, that boss fight is she's breaking free her kindred incarnates in the vault, and even though she died doing so and we killed her, she was able to break out Iridikron, Farak, and Viranoth, who would then go on to be set the stage as the villains for the rest of Dragonflight, right? And even beyond, most people seem to think that Iridikron is going to be like a recurring figure who goes deeper into the future than just this raid, right? Or not this raid, this expansion. Um, the interesting thing to me is this is just purely a fight about like this individual person, their individual corruption, and sort of them like and like the grappling with that nature of things, right? There's no greater threat that has been freed. There's no, this is not some indication of some huge power shift along the lines. He doesn't even die. Sarkareth is still technically alive, I think, at the end of the fight. It's kind of a question on whether or not that's true. I
he's
don't
like
actually know
maybe
like the
mortally wounded, but he right.
yeah, like, but he has like a quiet sort of like moment with Sibelian and with Rathion, because like Sarkareth said yes, where Sibelian and Rathion sort of said no when it came to like embracing the void and all this other sort of stuff. But I think that's interesting. It's sort of new for WoW. There's not a lot of, I can't think of really any other major boss fight recently that doesn't include something along those lines, right? From, let's say, okay, just to start at the beginning of Legion, right? First raid is the Emerald Nightmare. The Emerald Nightmare doesn't really count. There's certain boss fights that are climactic showdowns, but they don't affect the plot all that much. Nathria is also like this. Denathrius is a bad guy. We get rid of him, right? But it doesn't really do. It's not super important to like the plot or whatever. He's already done his thing. We're kind of just doing cleanup. Same thing with Xavius in like the Emerald Nightmare. But it's like every other fight in Legion, one just goes to the next, to the next, to the next, right? You have Gul'dan, you have Illidan resurrected, in Kil'jaeden, or in the Tomb of Sargeras, you kill Kil'jaeden, and then Illidan transports us to Argus, in order to get us home. At the end of Antorus, you've literally killed a Titan. Sargeras is dealt with. He's been trapped by the Pantheon in this star, and Illidan is there, all this other sort of stuff. And it's just like every other boss fight I can possibly think of in the kind of modern era of WoW. It's just kind of like very like that. which is, I don't know, it's neat, it's new. I don't know that that's good or bad. I just want to
Yeah,
draw
no,
attention
that's
to it anyway.
fair. Yeah, no, I mean that makes sense, right? Like he's kind of like an entirely patch contained boss as well, right? Like he kind of shows up, like or like he shows up beforehand, but it's like not really like a thing you're actively engaging with until this patch, right? And this whole thing happens, right? Like they're like around, but they're not like super part of like the past raid or whatever. Right? Yeah. Um, in terms of mechanics, the upstairs downstairs, like I don't know, I'm rarely a fan of upstairs downstairs mechanics, like on like this kind of like individual level, but it was fine. Um, I did kind of like the standing in lines mechanic just because like it felt like, you know, oh, we can aim it, and oh, you can actually like position yourself in a way that you don't have to drop DPS if you're careful about it, that kind of thing. Um, but otherwise, I don't know. Like it's not like none of the fights here felt like, you know, I don't know. So I can't remember the name of the boss. The boss that like had like the 4 vials that you had to fill up and down in Castle Nathria, and then like
Sure.
there, yeah,
Lady Darkbane.
Lady Darkbane. Thank you. Like that one felt like we had hard progression on that for a while. It felt really satisfying to get everything to like line up just so and get it to work right. None of the bosses in this raid felt that way to me here, right? Like every boss felt like a boss that we could have gotten down with enough time. Um, uh, and like, you know, obviously our Sarkareth kind of like march through progression was cut a little short by some help, but like I have like, you know, I had no doubt that we were going to finish that we would get Sarkareth down before the next patch dropped. Or like
Yeah, that's interesting.
yeah, like it just like needed time to bake, right? And we didn't even have that many reps on Sarkareth in heroic.
Yeah, my first Sarkareth kill was a big I felt very good about that because I was a very hero moment. In that one we were in phase 3, there were very few, there were maybe half the raid was alive and the soak mechanic happened, and I watched a bunch of people commit to the soak mechanic, and I just sort of did the math in my head and I was like, all of those people are going to die, but the boss was at like 8% health. So I took 2 shots to go downstairs. The soak mechanic went off. It killed everybody except for like a tank or whatever. I went downstairs. I did the Pac-Man thing. I came up with essentially Lust and Execute, and I just killed. It was like me, maybe like a healer or 2. There was like 1 or 2 other DPS and like 1 tank, and we just like tore the boss from that point. And that's like a very fun hero play, right? Story, right?
Right. Yeah.
When it comes to kind of like AOTC, and I think that that's something that we didn't have a ton of this, you know, this time around. um and maybe I think part of that is because that boss fight does ramp in intensity, but it doesn't have. Razageth was a very good boss fight for this, and I think
Yeah.
in hindsight, I think Razageth is a great boss fight. The thing about Razageth that's satisfying is the fight feels its most dangerous when it's actually its most winnable. But that's a sleight of hand that's really hard to pull off, right? Because what you don't want is you don't want a situation where things are too deadly and you're just wiping, you know, because of, you know, like whatever, like the stuff is happening. What you want is you want the final phase to be deadly enough that it feels like an intense escalation of the threats that you have currently faced, but under the hood it's actually easier, right? Which is the thing that I described when we talked about Raz. Technically speaking, we got over a hurdle with Razageth, and I looked at it and I was like, oh, we're killing the boss, right? We had a bunch of people up. We had kind of done the mechanic, right? We'd only ever seen that phase 3 sort of like once. And so it was like a question. And there's something satisfying about the way that plays out. That didn't work with Sarkareth for me. And I think maybe that's a failure in boss design, even though Sarkareth does theoretically have that sort of like ramping thing. I kind of feel like Sarkareth is probably too chaotic to get that sort of feeling. there's just like a lot of individual stuff to be managed. Lou in the chat said maybe I'm a pessimist because I thought we were screwed until we brought in the ringers. I also think that that's technically true. The thing is, I think we were mastering the mechanics, but just the number threshold wasn't there. Sarkareth was transitioning into phase 3, but he was transitioning with like 52% health, which is a lot of health to deal with in phase 3. But like part of that is also just like we had weird boss sizes when we were progging on, or raid sizes when we were progging on Sarkareth, and just we brought into friends of the raid who are very good gamers. They were doing a lot of damage or whatever. But I also just think getting to a set of a raid size that is more even when it came to DPS, healers, all that other stuff made a lot of sense. I don't know how you feel about any of that, but
I think I agree
yeah.
with that, right? Like our raid attendance has been wonky for the past couple of months. And so I think just kind of like the normalizing effect of it, especially because like like 12 to 13 people is awkward, like Lou says in the chat, and also like how you distribute healers there, how you how you make everything work out, especially since we're always so melee heavy, right? Like like it weirdly it felt like, and maybe Lou could speak to this a little bit more since she was healing, like it felt like our phase ones were kind of like on a knife's edge. Like I felt like we were like barely hanging on heals wise, and I'm not blaming the healers for that. I think that was like a numbers thing, right? Like that we like maybe had too many people for like the lesser number of healers, but too few people for the greater number, like at that break point.
Yeah. So I feel like Neltharion to me, Sarkareth for me is kind of smack dab in the middle of the raid. This is under Zakali, but above Amalgamation, which makes my favorite fight, which I would not have pinned this, Rashok. I guess Rashok is my favorite fight.
Lou in the chat says it has a lot to do with healer types in phase 1. You deeply need DR for those 2 big bursts. Raid typically doesn't have any.
I have some very good news for my good friend Alluria in the chat. Alluria Shadow Veil. Okay, when it comes to that, I don't know that I actually want to say this. Do I want to announce this on loud? My raid character, we are no longer Kruva pilled. Okay, Kruva gaming is over. We are in the era of Jonathan Howe for 10.2. I'm making the swap to Shaman because they kind of ruined Frostmage for me in a way. I think the change that they made to Frostmage was good overall, but it gave the spec too many buttons, and I really hated, and I just had a hard time interacting with it. John Howe, my Pandaren Shaman, is traditionally my second favorite character to play. There's also Gondor, my Warlock, but I haven't been super Warlock pilled in recent expansions, so I've decided I'm gonna give Zhan Hao a try, which means that I can theoretically heal and gear a healer spec because he is a shaman and he will have a healer spec to gear. So I don't know if this is maybe one of the WoW patches that I have been least engaged with the game. A lot of this is just work stuff. I was caring a lot about Estrella. I was putting a lot of time into Estrella, so I just like couldn't be playing WoW all the time. But I sort of also haven't been following like the 10.2 developments really at all. So yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
I assume Jonathan Howe is a joke thing.
Yeah, his name is Zhan Hao, and then people called him John Howe. And then I said his name was Jonathan Howe.
Okay.
It's just like one of those dumb things that kind of like snowballs for no reason. Yeah. It's like one of my people who know Akupara will understand this. The community manager for Akupara games, his name is Joseph, but his Discord handle is Riv Otter, right? And at some point, I don't know why I said this, I said Rivington Otter as if his first name is Rivington, like a butler or something like that.
Like Rivington the Third.
Yeah. And so I called him Rivington Otter, and so now I just call him Rivington Otter. It's like Dave is also like this. I don't know if you know this lore about Dave, another member of our raid group, Dave, famous WoW quitter Dave. Dave's in-game like handle thing is Will Dave. His like BattleNet thing is Will Dave, right? And I once called him William Dave, and Dave told me, he's like, yeah, it's not that kind of Will. I was like, what? What do you mean it's not that kind of Will? What kind of fucking Will can it be? What other names start with Will that aren't William? Or I'm sorry, actually, what it first was, I called him Dave, and he was like, Dave is actually my last name. And I was like, what? Your name? And he was like, yeah, my first name is Will. I was like, your first name is Will. And he was like, yeah, your first name is Will. Your name is William David. And he was like, no. And I was like, how could it be William David? What does Dave come from? What does Will come from? Will comes from William. Dave comes from David. And he was like, yeah, that's not my name. And so I was like, what the fuck is your... And then I think I found out, and then he was like, my first name is Wilford, but everyone calls me Will. And I was like, yeah, but what's your last name? What also comes from David? What is your name? Wilford?
Hold. This is an interesting story. I don't know if you want to shout this person's name.
True.
Full name on the internet.
I don't want to do that. But anyway, the story is, I started calling Dave Wilford Davington, because I was like, what could your name possibly be? What could Dave be short for? Davington was my answer. It is another name. I'm not gonna say it on stream. But it just like fucked with my brain so much that Wilford Davington became a thing, and then Rivington Otter became a thing, and then Jonathan Howe became a thing. Of just like expanding out these like dumb nicknames.
I get that, right? Like when we were playing a bunch of PUBG, the Tommy gun was a thing. For whatever reason, I started calling it the Thomson Reuters gun, which is like, because it's like the Thompson is, it's called Tommy gun because it was a Thompson, but Thomson Reuters is obviously like a news organization, right? Like,
Yeah.
But yeah, no, the little things get stuck in your head, like that.
I understand. No, it's like there's a restaurant near me called Joey Manhattan Beach, but it wraps around the name of the restaurant wraps around the name of the restaurant, so it's Joey Manhattan Beach is around the corner, and so whenever we drive by there, it's like, hey, I'm Joey Manhattan, right?
Man, or like for whatever reason, in the last patch of the last expansion, I just got in my head that like you had like rich lacestrite deposits, right? Like I got in my head that like a rich lacestrite was like the name of a gnome. It's like, hey, I'm Rich Lacestrite.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we're deep in the back half now. We do want to put some final thoughts. This is my ending ranking. I want to say Rashok, Forgotten Entities, Neltharion, or Forgotten Experience, Neltharion, the Zakali Offensive, Sarkareth, Amalgam, Kazara, Magmarax, Ziskarn. Where did you end up with?
Yeah, so I never said I'm gonna put Sarkareth in fourth. So I'm gonna go Zakali, Rashok, Neltharion, Sarkareth, Kazara, Magmarax, Amalgation, Forgotten. And with the breakpoints being like, Sarkareth is the last good boss. And then like the only truly bad boss in my mind is Ziskarn. Ziskarn. Okay. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's Forgotten. I didn't say Ziskarn. I hate Ziskarn so much that I forgot to even put him at the bottom. But yeah, relatively fun raid patch. I don't know, nothing special. Not one that I think I'll remember. But I got in 6 years. This is actually, speaking of which, this is like the 7. I believe on Thursday it's the 7-year anniversary of the podcast.
Holy fuck!
Yeah. But like in another 7 years, we're playing World of Warcraft Cataclysm 3. I'll be like, oh yeah, that was a patch.
Yeah, I definitely feel you. I don't know, like I just didn't interact with this patch much else. I haven't done the campaign quests even. I just need to sit down and play all the way through them at some point. So this patch is definitely pretty quiet in my opinion. The one thing I will say about the raid that we didn't talk about, but that in my opinion was a huge success, was the changes to upgrading raid loot. Being able to upgrade raid loot with the crests or whatever, I think that is a banger system. 10 out of 10, right? I don't know. I guess I'm at 10 out of 10. I would make changes to the system. They are making changes to the system. But I love this. I think it has made our kind of it's made our raid much stronger because it lets you pump your items up to higher levels without dealing with any of these kinds of issues. It's kind of just one of those systems that it was introduced to fix a problem, and it fixed that problem really well. And yeah, I feel I don't know, that feels good. So I don't have any more complex thoughts about like the the fragments, the crests, all that crap. But I wanted to say for the record that that was good.
Yeah, I would I generally agree with that. Yeah. So what have you been up to this week?
Been playing a lot of well, so my big thing is what do you know about these cooking games like Overcooked? You know about this?
I've played them like once or twice.
Okay, have you ever heard of Plate Up?
No.
Okay, I've been sort of deep in this cooking genre. We were looking at a game. This happens from time to time. We looked at games for publication, who or publishing, I guess. Games come to us. They're like, "Hey, we want you to publish our game." We go, "Okay." I saw the game that we were thinking about publishing. And I needed to understand the genre. So we played some Overcooked, we played some of this game. This has evolved to be about Plate Up, which is a game that came out a couple of years ago and is a roguelike version of this, right? So it is a cooperative game, and you do this thing where you have people in front, people in back, front of house people, back of house people. There's certain people who are, moving the, like they are cooking the thing and then moving it to the thing or whatever. But because it's a roguelike, it's actually incredible. And I think this is my favorite of the ones that we've seen so far. Basically, here's my problem. Overcooked and a lot of the games that are similar to Overcooked that I experienced, it's essentially a puzzle game, right? Where each level is a puzzle that you and a group of people solve. So you're a group of 3, your group of 4, whatever it is. You'll get together, you'll solve this game. And Buddy may not remember this, but his Plate Up session is at least partially my fault. No way. Your Plate Up session cannot possibly be your fault because I got Plate Up from somebody else.
Oof. Well, keep telling your story and we'll
okay.
We'll
anyway, so the thing is that you're it's like Candy Crush. Candy Crush goes level by level and it gets harder or whatever. You 3-star these levels. That's what you're doing in Overcooked. You have a group of people, and you have a group of people, and these people are progressing or whatever. But the thing is that when you get a different group of people, right? What do? Do you continue from where you started with another group of people? It's like, well, you have all this tutorializing you've learned. Part of the fun of this is falling into the routine of, okay, I'm back of house, you're front of house. We have our own individual roles. We're thing, that kind of stuff. What happens in Plate Up though is it's because it's a roguelike, you just start a new restaurant. You just start a new save, essentially, right? And the expectation is you will eventually lose, right? So it's not that big of a deal. We have completed we did one restaurant to franchise, which was we did like a dumplings restaurant. We got really good, we got really efficient at it, and that felt really great and everything like that. But then when we started playing with other people, it was like, oh hey, let's start a Warren came to my house and we just played. It was me, Warren, and Rachel, and we just played the 3 of us, essentially local co-op. And it was just like, oh, this is actually like this is really simple. This is really fun. But then later that night, we played 4 people with Lou, and it's like, okay, well, we'll just make a new restaurant, right? We'll do our new restaurant. We'll save our first restaurant to do this other sort of thing. I don't know what it is about these games, but they're so fucking fun. There is something to the division of labor that becomes really engaging in sort of the way that it became engaging in Payday, right? So you remember in Payday you have like the drills guy, you know, you have the tank, you have shotguns, you have all this other sort of stuff. You can kind of make a team loadout in that way. We sort of do the same thing in Plate Up, where it's like, okay, I will take care of, you know, the pumpkin pies and making the cake batter, and then I'll pass that to Warden, and he's the one who manages the oven, he's baking the cakes, he's putting the cakes out, and then Rachel is doing front of house, where she is she's filling customer orders based on that. And creating that pipeline is just insanely fun and interesting. And yeah.
Yeah, no, it sounds entertaining. I just like, I don't know, my experience with this was with friend of the cast, RKJ, and the way he plays those kinds of games is like, he's like, no, get out of the way, and just like shoves your character out of the way, like into the water in Overcooked, and it's like, well, that was the thing. That was exactly how I expected this to go.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah.
It is the worst way to play a cooperative game, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. Also, we didn't play for super long, right? Like, it was not like, but like, I just, not a thing that I ever fell super into.
Well, listen, if you want to be a Plate Up gamer, you let me fucking know, okay, bud?
Okay. Things I did do this week, was I did the mega dungeon because
Oh,
we
nice.
finished raid so early.
Yeah.
And number one audience fan Lou healed for it. We went through the mega dungeon. It was neat. It was cool to be able to do it. There was a little bit of drama towards the end. Friend of the cast, Low Kicks, got aggravated with me because he was like, "Pay attention to her hair." I'm like, "What about her hair?" With like
Oh my god, that fight sucks so bad. I think it's the worst fight I've seen in like a long time. It's a real bad fight.
Yeah, no, everything ended up turning out all right. Yeah, this is what she's still yelling about Morchi's hair. I would say that if I was describing that mechanic to another person, I would say the fake Morchis are going to be wearing hats. So look for the one that's not wearing a hat instead of like look at her hair and memorize her hair, which is how it was presented to me. But different strokes for different folks. It was a fun dungeon. I don't think I'm in any state to like do like a full rundown of it because it's kind of like trounced our way through it, right? Like Low Kicks is obviously very good and fairly overgeared, and like soloed the last boss for us, basically from like for most of it because it's my first time doing it, and so I messed up quite a bit, but it was a good time. Otherwise, I've got over 100 hours in Street Fighter right now, so just keep still on that grind, still on that Zangief grind.
Yeah, I understand you. I put in maybe 100. I've put in about 150 hours since picking up Total War Warhammer 3 again. It's that whole thing is so complicated. I want to sort of talk about it, but I also sort of don't. Total War is in the middle of a huge backlash.
Right.
I am typically very skeptical of gamer backlashes, but this one is real, in my opinion. Like, I'm on the side of gamers. Essentially, the backlash is that Total War Warhammer 3 is in a pretty... it's funny. I think it's in a great spot. But do you know like the phrase that like people are sensitive to change, not like value, not absolute value?
You're all yeah. No,
Yeah. So what people do is they acclimate, right? People set, and let's call it like acclimation sort of 0, right? So acclimation says things change, and over time it sets your perception to 0, to this neutrality, right? And then what you get sensitive to is changes from the new 0, right? Total War Warhammer 3 is a fabulous, fantastic, expansive game. Comparing it to previous games in the genre, in the series and other games in the genre, I think it compares phenomenally well, right? No other game, in my opinion, can match Total War Warhammer 3 on this sort of fantasy of a huge world, all these different races, but like a million different starts, right? Over 70 legendary lords. You could do all this stuff. And it's because of all of the development and work course of the game. That said, when the game has been out for more than a year, which it has been at this point, it's been about a year and a half since Total War Warhammer 3 released. People set their calibration to 0, right? And the thing that happened was they did two things. One, they added Chaos Dwarves earlier this year, in February of this year. Chorfs, they increased the price from $20 to $25 for what it was called an expansion pack. This is a race pack, which is we're adding a new race to the game. A new race is a $20 DLC. Okay, sure. This is now a $25 DLC. I get that. Inflation is a thing. I, of all people, get that. I literally set game prices. I set game prices. I understand. You need to set prices to be what makes sense for the money. I'm on board with that. The thing that has the Total War Warhammer community so up in arms is the first Lord pack came out. The Lord packs are typically two legendary lords, right? And a smattering of units between them. And the price point for that was $10. Okay. This is the $10 DLC for the lifetime of Total War 1 and Total War Warhammer 2, right? The change in Total War Warhammer 3 is the legendary lord packs are now 3 lord packs, right? There are 3 legendary lords in the packs. Theoretically, more content, right? But the price jumps from $10 to $25. And even though there is an extra Warhammer lord in there, you have 3 lords instead of the 2, right? The number of units that actually come in the pack are, generally speaking, still pretty low. And in my opinion, for this pack that they just released, pretty low quality units. A problem that Total War has had sometimes is there are sometimes when they have added units in these packs that are really great and useful and core to the roster. The Mandalore Gaming video touched on this, where he kind of talked about how none of the DLC feels super necessary, except for if you plan to play Skaven, you really can't play base game Skaven, right? That race is incomplete without the Prophet and the Warlock DLC, which adds a bunch of units to the roster that kind of like flesh out how Skaven sort of work. I think that's true, right? I agree with that assessment. I would even say I'm more aggressive on that assessment than even Mandalore Gaming was, which is to say that I also think that there are some units in other packs that are super necessary to flesh out to kind of like flesh out the roster. Shadows of Change, this most recent DLC, included a bunch of units that felt incredibly superfluous, and so what happened is there were races that feel like Skaven from Warhammer 2, which is they're not really complete. There's gaps in the arsenal that are missing, and those gaps are a problem, right? But they didn't fill those gaps with like real things that would have helped these sort of like races actually kind of fulfill their identity. And on top of that, there's a bunch of just sort of obvious other stuff that was sort of like left out. So for instance, the Kislev character, who I like quite a lot, her name is Mother Ostankia. Mother Ostankia is sort of like a Baba Yaga figure, right? She's a witch in the woods. And so she added these like wicker dog things and this like whatever, and she also added a hero unit to the game called Hags, but there was not a lord version of the hero unit, so she's still, when she's the faction leader, she's recruiting lords that are just regular, essentially Russian boyars or whatever. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. She's the leader of the Hags. She'd be recruiting Hags who are leading these Hag armies. What are we, why am I doing this sort of thing? And so anyway, I got myself the DLC just because I wanted to see. I am unfortunately disappointed in my purchase, but at the same time, the game is so good that even if I'm not playing these DLC characters, I'm just having such a good fucking time playing Warhammer 3 again, and I just like got into a couple playthroughs, and I was just like, man, this game is so great. Like, even though it sucks and there's this whole backlash about the price is terrible and all this other sort of stuff. I just, yeah. Anyway, I'm sorry. That was a probably a pretty poor explanation of everything that's going on. But I'm playing a lot of Total War Warhammer 3 is the answer.
Fair enough. Yeah. No. What else am I doing? I am continuing to get through Baldur's Gate. And I feel like the game is just like coming apart at the seams, right? Like,
Oh yeah, because you're in Act 3, right?
yeah.
Jason Schreier said this thing on Twitter that I thought was so correct, where he was like, gamers are talking about how polished Baldur's Gate 3 is, but I think they don't understand the term polish. What they mean is density. We talked about this on our Baldur's Gate cast. What they mean is this like density, that there's like all this stuff to do and all this crazy shit. But he was like, but I think most of them are just judging a very well polished Act 1, and they have not seen the incredibly broken Act 3. And I was like,
yeah,
yes.
no, 100% into that, right? Like, like sneaking, like I was sneaking around the art collector's house, right? Like, and like I picked something up and it was doing that thing that it did in the toy shop where like, it seemed like something detected me. I saw all these fists running around the ground floor, but all of a sudden they all stopped and they all walked back to where they were and it wasn't a problem. Also like, and maybe I just like haven't found the right NPC to talk to, but there's this painting on the wall that's like, this is a very valuable painting. Its value is the same as any other painting in the house, right? Like, so I assume there's like a collector I need to find to talk to about it, but it's none of the people in the house. It's not like it's like I could be like, hey, I have the painting that you'd be interested in. So maybe I just need to find that still, but
can I ask you, did you do the bank?
I am
counting house.
That is soon. That is very soon.
Okay.
Like I'm kind of working around it because I know it's Minsk, right?
When you do the bank, ping me, or okay. Remind me, and because I have a whole thing about the bank that's funny. But yeah, I absolutely understand. I mean, I complained about this a lot when it came to Baldur's Gate. We broke multiple endgame quests just because of how we sort of approached things, and yeah, it really sucks completing that game with a bunch of quests in the like. It's funny because I don't want to say Baldur's Gate 3 let me down. That's a little too harsh, but it's sort of the opposite effect of people say wow him in the end, right? That's what I don't even remember. It's like some Hollywood producer says that wow him in the end, and that's how you get a hit, right? That's kind of is the kind of thing. Or it's like restaurants should focus on their desserts, right? If you have really good desserts at your restaurant, people come back, is the idea, right? Baldur's Gate is sort of the opposite of that. Baldur's Gate is its most polished, most core experience, I think, early on, and the longer the game goes, the more it kind of unravels at the seams.
Yeah, I mean, like even things that aren't like sequence break things, right? Like I just got my relationship. I got my sex scene with Shadowheart, right? But like she had changed her hair color at some point. Well, first of all, I talked to her and she said, "How do you like the new look?" And I had known from something else that she changed her hair color, but she was wearing a helmet, so I couldn't tell. Right? Took her helmet off. She's got a new hair color, right? I do this scene with her, and she has the black hair again. Like it's like, it's just like
she's role playing for you.
Yeah. Just like and like things overlap in weird ways, right? Like, and like don't quite like hit the right spot, right? Like, and like I said, it feels like it's coming apart at the seams, but like it's still working, right? Like I don't feel like it's gonna burst, right? But like we'll get there. I can tell that the end is in sight. I'm making a push for it, right? Like
I believe in you. Yeah, we'll talk about it. Maybe we'll talk about it. I have a lot of spoiler stuff that I want to talk about in that third section. That's a lot of fun. Yeah, I think.
But yeah, it's still a neat game. I'm still trying. There's a reason I haven't dropped it, but I want to finish it, and I want to finally play Phantom Liberty because I finished watching Edge Runners like 2 weeks ago. But like other things I've done, I watched. So we're gonna talk about some of this stuff next week. But I watched Pope's Exorcist, which was a neat film. I watched the first episode of 30 Coins, which is on HBO Max, and it's like a Spanish language film. I'm telling you people this because we're gonna talk about these next week. And if you want to watch along, which is like the first episode of 30 Coins is like weirdly very similar to Pope's Exorcist. And they're just like, they're also very different. I think Pope's Exorcist is much better, but like 30 Coins is interesting in a lot of ways. And then to finish it off, we watched Constantine, um, which was a fun film.
Mhm.
Makes you gonna want to go read the Constantine comics. And then the only other thing I watched of note was I watched Mike Birbiglia's latest stand-up special called The New One, which I think was released in 2019. It was like, I think we were looking for something light, and I was like, oh, I know Mike Birbiglia, and it was gut busting. We were laughing so hard. It's all about him uh, going through the phase of like not wanting a kid. His wife wants a kid. They get pregnant. They have a kid, and his like early fatherhood stages, and it's hilarious. If you like I back in like when I was in high school, when like I was still listening to a lot of Pandora, I would put on like the comedy, like the stand up comedy channel on Pandora, and his one of his older specials would be in there regularly, and I loved him from that, so I just picked it up again. I've also been
Okay.
the new season of Bake Off is coming out, so I'm watching that. I watched the first 2 episodes of that with my girlfriend. I was super sad this week because the person who went off. I won't spoil it for anybody who hasn't watched it yet. I thought the guy who ended up like he just had a really bad weekend. I thought he had a really good first week, and I felt so sad because I think there are people who are much worse than him that are going to uh, go that I I think are going to go off relatively shortly. But I think it's a relatively good cast this week or this season. It's always fun to watch. I like Bake Off. It's just like it's a comfy show in a way, right? It's a reality show, but it's not like Cutthroat. Um, and oh, and Taskmaster is simul releasing its episodes with the UK release, or at least it seems that way, and it's great. I'm having a lot of fun watching it as it comes out. I am not as big a fan of the season as I've been in the previous seasons, but it's still a funny show. So Taskmaster also gets a thumbs up for me this season. This week on Mango Watches British Television.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have you started The Sopranos yet? I just have to know.
No. Yeah. Louis in the chat says they even took the disability checkbox for diversity this season on Bake Off. Yeah, there is a deaf contestant, and there's a signer. She had a not so great first week, and like I was weighing in my head, it's like, are they going to keep her on? Like, are they going to like weigh it in her favor so they can like keep the like they can't put the deaf person off in the first week, right? But on the other side, it's like, well, if she goes off, then the signer can go off with her, and they can come back on staff. But yeah, I have not started Sopranos because I wanted to start Sopranos, but my girlfriend wanted to watch something spooky because it's spooky season, so we watched something spooky. Also, I'm going to start the second season of Loki, which is a couple episodes out at this point. Did you ever watch the first season?
I watched the first episode, but I didn't watch any more of it. I just need to watch
okay,
it.
That might be a thing we can do at the end of its run.
Yeah, there's a bunch of Disney stuff that like I theoretically want to watch Ahsoka. I don't even care that much about Ahsoka. Like, there's this whole generation of people who care a lot about Ahsoka because they grew up on the Clone Wars series, which I understand. I love prequel stuff, and Ahsoka is like prequel stuff. And the thing I love most about it is the renaissance of Hayden Christensen. Like, I love like that stuff. That stuff seems very made for me. The Obi-Wan show was very made, right? And I talked about this, how the Obi-Wan show is a show for people who take the drama of the prequel series, right? And how it kind of like matters or whatever. Ahsoka just seems to kind of be like more along those sorts of lines. But I don't know. I haven't interacted with it. It feels like it's kind of crazy that this is the case. It feels like Star Wars has become oversaturated in a way. Like, first, and it was something that was so important to me, and we were so deep in it, right? But then like this like Rise of Skywalker just like destroyed so much, right? And all the discourse about like The Last Jedi. I saw a tweet that was like, hey, I just saw this film from 2017 called The Last Jedi. Is this a good site to talk about it? I was just like, oh my god. Yeah, all of it feels so special now. Yeah, that's absolutely, I don't know. I get kind of all of that. I also just like,
I still haven't watched Mando season 2. Like, that's how far
oh
gone I
my
am.
god.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know, which is crazy. Somebody wrote a tweet that was like, it is insane that that Disney fumbled 2 huge crossover successes with Star Wars, which I don't even know how much I feel about that, but they're talking about how the Force Awakens and Last Jedi culminated with Rise of Skywalker. Everybody universally hates it, right? And how Mando season 1 was this like must-watch television show, and Mando season 2 and 3, it's just like, can you believe Mando season 3 is out? It's out. We could watch it, but we just haven't. Like, I don't know, something about it.
Yeah, no, it's no, I agree, and like we have our disagreements on Last Jedi, but like it is incredible to me that like I just like can't bring myself like there's an era where it's like I would absolutely be there every moment, right? Like, I just I can't like I can't muster the will.
Star Wars doesn't feel like Star Wars anymore, Mango. I gotta break up with Star Wars, says Patrick H. Willems. A friend of the pod, Patrick H. Willems said. The Derpy Award winner, Patrick H. Willems has said. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I loved Andor. You didn't watch Andor, right?
I haven't watched anything because I need to go watch Mando season 2.
I think you should. I told myself I wasn't gonna give a shit. People said Andor was good. I sat down and watched Andor. It was good. It was insane, actually. So it was.
Yeah, no, I need to get into it. Part of it is that like it seems like some of these series are hit or miss, but like they're also hit or miss in the way that like I can't tell if they're actually hit or miss or if just like certain groups of people online are mad about them. Like I've heard mixed things about Ahsoka. I don't know if it's good or not. I've just heard like, and it's like not even like I haven't heard it in enough volume. Like, it's not like it's bad enough that like a bunch of people are screaming about it online. It's like I heard that's like it's not great, right? Like, I have also heard that like the new season of Castlevania isn't great. I haven't watched the first season of Castlevania, and I meant to get around to that at some point. So, it is what it is.
And here I am watching a show from 20 years ago.
Yeah,
Sopranos is so good though. There's a moment I tweeted about this, and I'm not gonna spoil anything. But there's a moment where something happens, and it's such a the thing about this, and I don't want to be this person, but I will say it's the best moment in the show, in my opinion. But it's so quiet and understated. And I could talk for probably an hour about this moment and why it's so important and the construction of it and how it is like all of the show has led to this precise singularity of Tony Soprano doing this one thing in this one instance of the show or whatever. And it's just like I haven't had that feeling in a long time, I guess is what I would say. I haven't had that feeling. Ironically, I haven't had that feeling since the Sopranos movie came out. The Many Saints of Newark, which was 3 years ago, I think. Because the Many Saints of Newark has a moment like, and I will die on the hill that everybody misunderstood. Sopranos people don't like this movie. And we'll talk about it, I'm sure. Sopranos people don't like this movie. What they don't like about it though is dumb, and they're stupid idiots, and they don't understand the show, and they can't figure out. They want plot when they should be caring about theme, and they don't understand how to read a character arc. They don't see the character arc, and we'll talk about it. I want to talk about this so bad.
We'll get there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't know. The thing I saw about Tony Soprano today was a tweet that was like, Christopher Columbus was a hero, and that's the end of that.
Do you know about this?
What? Oh, is that like a real thing? Is that a real thing in the show?
In the show Sopranos, I think in the 3rd season, there is an episode called Christopher, which is about a Native American protest at the Christopher Columbus Day parade.
See, I thought that was like a meme, like that was like somebody projecting out from him, but like that makes sense, right? Like,
it is, frankly. I once had a teacher describe. You know the Lincoln Douglas debates?
Yeah. I didn't do LD. Friend of the cast, Zao did LD. I did public forum, but I hung out with the LD kids. Yeah.
Okay.
But you mean the actual Lincoln Douglas debates? They're named after.
Yes. The actual Lincoln Douglas debates were describing me in a history class as they are the best debates in American history because everything after that just waters things down to sort of like baseline politics. But this is where two really knowledgeable, really effective politicians and lawyers are having actual material debates about the politics. If you read these, you will say, oh my god, everything else is so much worse. Like we have it so bad today compared to what what we had back then. And I painfully resist this framing. You know how painfully I resist this framing. But the way the episode Christopher deals with the poignant political topic of Christopher Columbus as both a hero symbol of Italian pride.
Yeah,
At the
he's
same
essentially
time,
the stand-in for Italian American.
yeah,
He's like the early kind of like affirmative action isn't quite right, but like constituency appeasement kind of deal, right? Ethnic
yeah,
constituency
exactly.
appeasement.
Yeah, in our history deep dive for this week, Columbus Day was only added to give Italians a day on the calendar, kind of like St. Patrick's Day in a way, right? Where it's like, hey, we can celebrate you and your heritage, kind of thing. And the way that this 1 hour of episode, this 1 hour television deals with like this tense political social justice topic has made me just be like, I hate everything. And like it's like, I imagine an episode of a TV show coming out now and addressing this topic is actually insane to me, because like no one would ever tackle it with the level of nuance that The Sopranos tackled it. And part of that is because it's an ensemble show. You can voice a lot of different opinions,
Right.
by having a bunch of different people all do different sorts of things and tackle it in a weird way. And also it's a very like morally challenged show where like the episode doesn't come to any definitive conclusions, right? It just presents a lot of different arguments about a lot of different sides with a lot of different nuances, and sort of threads it into the narrative, on top of all this other sort of stuff. But yeah, so that Christopher Columbus shit is real. That's a real episode.
So it's interesting. You mentioned the Lincoln Douglas and like the kind of like the devolving of debates. And I actually listened to, obviously this is one guy's perspective, podcast recently where the essential claim is that debates actually debates may not have been good from Lincoln Douglas, but debates actually died with Nixon Kennedy, like true substantive debates, because that like the way it was put is like if you watch those debates, Nixon is like doing like a real debate, right? Like he's doing the thing where like he kind of like he does the thing where like he's like agrees with Kennedy on certain points and like takes that and then refutes the strongest parts of it and like does it like a real debate, right? But like this gets perceived as weak because he's agreeing with Kennedy, right? And so the landscape shifts and everybody just kind of like never agrees with anybody else, and all they do is, and then don't answer the question, they answer the question they want to answer, right? Like, and that's the start of all of that.
Yeah, I probably would agree with an assessment kinds of lines. I also think that the part of my resisting of that framing is that like I think debates now are more effective than ever. It's just a question of, are they effective at talking about the nuances of substantial policy change, or are they effective at getting people to vote for you? And I think they're very effective at getting people to vote for you. It's just they're effective at motivating your base and all this other kind of like political stuff.
Yeah, I mean that's also like that is also an interesting thing. Is like we went from like basically 2016, like there was hints of it with like the Obama elections, but like Trump forward has been less of like traditionally you would like run to the extremes in the primary and run to the center in the general, but like the last couple of elections have been about juicing turnout more than about like getting crossover voters, and that's kind of like
so that I've weirdly, this is one of those things I did a bunch of research. The inflection point here is actually 2004. The reason 2004 matters is because John Kerry's campaign was about one end and George Bush's was about the other. George Bush, the thing that got him elected in 2004, outside of other stuff, was his campaign strategy was about activating voters, activating voters in his base rather than appealing to the moderate center. He did end up appealing to the moderate center in kind of, people just like that in general, right? But his strategy for getting votes was not, I am going to take essentially everybody in the swing states forward was like, or everybody in like the 2004 forward was like, you need to get to swing states, right? You want to go to swing states where you could, and then you want to get moderates to vote for you. But the truth of modern data analytics, which we didn't really have access to in like the latter half of the 20th century yet. It really took the internet to get here. Is that there's actually a deeper well of voters who agree with you who don't go to the polls. Then there is a well of moderates who could vote for either candidate, and you convince them to vote for you over the other guy, right? And so that's been a huge change in how electoral politics in the United States works.
Yeah, are you familiar with the Flight 93 election essay?
No. The United 93, like 9/11?
Yeah, no. So this is like a famous essay, and I don't remember basically the framing of the essay. I believe it was like you have to vote for Donald Trump because Hillary Clinton is so bad, right? Like, and this is like basically like kind of like the signpost for like everything that's wrong with like current electoral politics, right? Is like that's how you motivate some of these people who stay home, is like you make it so important, right? You must come vote, because like, you know, that's not to say that there's not some truth to this at certain levels, right? Like there's a version of this is like, you know, democracy is on the line. How much of that is true is less important than people believing it is true, so that they feel obligated to go out and vote for your candidate at the polls, right? And one of the starting points of this is the Flight 93 election essay.
I just want to be clear. The metaphor here is that the idea is the plane has been hijacked and we need to drive it into the ground rather than let it reach its destination. Is that what you're saying?
I forget the base metaphor, but it like the shorthand Flight 93 election is like, you know, you must hold your nose and do the bad thing because otherwise it's going to be so much worse, right? And this was particularly true of 2016 Donald Trump, right? Like that is what the essay was written about. Let me see if I can find it. But it gets referred to as like, I hate this, like the people I listen to I hate this Flight 93 election.
I cannot believe that is, I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess I have complicated feelings about 9/11 or whatever. Just like the idea of invoking that as a metaphor is ghoulish to the extreme.
Yeah, so this is the opening of it. It's Claremont Review of Books. Claremont has gone off of a cliff. It was a little bit more moderate back when this was written. But 2016 is the Flight 93 election. Charge the cockpit or you die. You may die anyway. You or the leader of your party may make it in the cockpit and not know how to fly or land the plane. There are no guarantees. That is the opening paragraph of this essay.
Oh my God. Yeah. Holy shit.
Yeah, no, and this is like, this has been like a lot of like the motivating, like this is like, you know, there is a narrative you can tell that this is how like 2016 and forward has rolled out for the Republican Party, is like everything is the end of the world. And there's a case to be made that's on the other side, also a case to be made that it's a little bit more justified on the other side, right? But like,
yeah, I mean, do you know about the 9/11 January 6th thing? This is a debate that's been happening kind of in like politics circles, but like, I guess I would probably say less serious politics circles than the ones that I expect that you pay attention to.
What is like, which is worse, January 6th or 9/11?
Yeah, so the founder of the Lincoln Project went on to a hyper conservative podcast and was criticizing January 6th. And the host asked him what he thought was a clarifying layup question, which was, which is worse, 9/11 or January 6th? And the guy said January 6th. And he made his case. And I would say he made I wouldn't say good case, but he made a valid case, right? In the sense that his logic was sort of there. But it blew up. It became a whole thing. And every other political podcast like kind of memed out. They were like, which is worse, you guys, right? Like, yeah, it's kind of like the Reddit question of like, would you rather fight a horse-sized duck or 100 duck-sized horses or whatever? It's like that kind of, you know, that kind of thing. But yeah, that was a couple of weeks ago. I was just like, wow, we're really invoking 9/11 a lot these days.
Yeah, the Lincoln Project is special, is what I will call it. No, I mean it is, again, some Derps talk about games, we're getting heavy into politics, but like
some Derps talking about politics, I swear to God.
There's essentially like two versions of Never Trump conservatives, right? And one of them, like Lincoln Project, is also kind of grifty, so that's its own thing. But like, there's one kind who have like are like still principled conservatives, but like don't truck with Trump. And then there's another kind that's kind of like basically Democrats at this point.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because some of that has also seemed to like have pulled the Democratic Party in certain ways. But it's, it's a whole thing, and I won't get into like conservative hagiography here. I sent you this on Twitter. I don't know if you saw it, but like the state I'm in has a large libertarian presence, and like the leadership of one of the organizations just like kicked out a very controversial guy, and there was a whole dust up about it on Twitter. Everything, the caucus that took over the Libertarian Party, the Mises Caucus, is like falling apart and is like like damaged the party. Everything is terrible. I hate everything, and I'm probably gonna run into at least one Republican primary person at some point in the next 2 months.
I hope you're excited, baby. Let's go. Man. Okay, yeah, we've talked about enough about politics. We can close it from here.
If you would like to tell us what you think about Mike Pence or any of the other things we talked about on this podcast, you can email us at somedirtsplaygames@gmail.com or podcast@somedirtsplaygames.com. You can follow us at twitch.tv/somedirtsplaygames or youtube.com/somedirtsplaygames, where these go out live. Rate, review us on iTunes. What else? Leave us a review, all that good stuff. Links are all in the description. Buddy, I don't have anything I'm looking to promote, Buddy, do you have anything you're looking to promote? There we go.
Nothing I'm looking to promote. I'm chilling for now. We did a big. Did you see the Occupar live stream? Did you see anything of that as well?
I saw that you had one. Congratulations!
Yeah, we had
7
one.
years.
Yeah, it is the 7-year. It was a huge project. We streamed all day or whatever. I was streaming it, but then like Luis, the video editor at our company streamed. He has a segment that was so fucking funny. I couldn't stop laughing. I was dying of laughter. Anyway, that VOD is up on YouTube. I'm not looking to promote this, to be clear. I just think it is genuinely so funny. Watch this like Luis segment. It's the greatest shit. It's in the middle there. It's like it'd be like 4 hours in or something like that. I'm sure there's timestamps on the video. So this is less me promoting and more me just making a recommendation to go just watch this funny ass fucking live stream. The story here is Luis was making themed coffee for some of our different games, but it's just kind of a comedy of errors in a way. I'm watching Rachel rush to the computer to type something in chat right now because it was so goddamn funny.
Yeah. So something I just realized, was that on Occupara's 7th anniversary of existence?
Yeah. To the October 5th is October 5th, 2016 is when the company was like founded, right?
You realize that Occupara is only a week older than this podcast.
Oh yeah. Oh my god. Oh my god, literally that. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, like
I guess that's true.
Yeah, so the day of the first, I have it on my Google Calendar. The podcast anniversary is the 12th of October. So yeah, literally 1 week.
Literally 1 week. That's incredible, actually, that I've been doing this podcast the same amount. I mean, obviously, I haven't worked at Occupar that long. I joined Occupar in 2019, 3 years after. But yeah.
Oh well, so that means you've been at Occupara longer than wait, no. Were you at
Square Enix? I was 2013 to 2019.
Okay.
5.5 years.
Okay, so. Yeah. Never mind. Sorry. For whatever reason I confused podcast start date with your start date at Square Enix. But yeah. Yeah,
Orion says in the chat, it's so fucking funny. It's actually like a separate stream thing. Well, whatever, we fixed that. The man drinks 8 shots of espresso over the course of the video. The energy is unhinged.
I'll have to check it out. Sounds good.
There's this part where I'm not gonna explain it. It's so fucking funny. Just go watch it.
Can you get me a timestamp so I can put a link in the description?
Yeah, I will find the video. We put the VOD up on YouTube. I will find the video and give you a link to when it starts. Oh god. All right. What a game.
With that, I will say until next time, dear listeners.
Until next time, loyal listeners.